37 minutes after the first impact, the Iron Dome batteries across Tel Aviv were still firing, still trying, still missing. Not because the operators were incompetent, because the weapon they were facing wasn't designed to be intercepted. And the people who built Israel's air defense network knew it. I've been analyzing missile defense failures for years, and I can tell you exactly what 37 minutes of continuous firing without success means. It doesn't mean the system malfunctioned. It means the system was asked to do something it was never built to do. Here's what happened on the morning of April 3rd, 2026. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched multiple Khorramshahr-4 ballistic missiles toward Tel Aviv. Each missile carried a cluster warhead. At approximately 7 kilometers altitude, each warhead opened. Dozens of submunitions scattered across the sky, and then they fell. 50 sites in the heart of Tel Aviv were struck simultaneously. The Khorramshahr-4 didn't need to penetrate Israeli air defenses. It bypassed them entirely, not by being faster or stealthier, by being smarter. Before I show you exactly how this missile defeated every layer of Israel's air defense network, and why no system on Earth could have stopped it, hit subscribe. This is war conflict. I post forensic analysis of every major escalation, and this is the one that proves missile defense, as we know it, is obsolete. Let me start with what is confirmed and what is not, because transparency matters. On April 3, 2026, the IRGC announced that Khorramshahr-4 multi-warhead missiles successfully struck more than 50 points in the heart of Tel Aviv and other occupied territories. The Khorramshahr-4 is a liquid-fueled, medium-range ballistic missile with a range of approximately 2,000 kilometers and a warhead weight of 1,500 to 1,800 kilograms. The missile uses hypergolic liquid fuel, meaning it can be prepared for launch in a very short time and can remain fueled for extended periods. Israeli air defense systems failed to intercept a significant number of Iranian missiles. Hebrew press reports revealed that about a quarter of the missiles launched in the final week of the confrontation penetrated Israeli defenses. Since the war began on February 28, 2026, Israeli hospitals have treated 2,975 injuries, with 85 still hospitalized, including 9 in serious condition. What is analysis? The exact number of submunitions per missile, the precise interception failure rate, and the full casualty figures are estimates based on open source intelligence. Different analysts may calculate different numbers, but the strategic implications, those are clear. Here's what you need to understand before we go further. This wasn't a lucky shot. This was a systematic exploitation of a fundamental weakness in every air defense system on Earth. Let me explain what the Khorramshahr-4 actually does. Because once you understand the mechanism, the word interception starts to sound like wishful thinking. The Khorramshahr-4 is a liquid-fueled ballistic missile with a range of 2,000 kilometers and a warhead weighing up to 1,800 kilograms. It also integrates what is believed to be a maneuverable re-entry vehicle, which can change trajectory during descent using small thrusters to make terminal interception significantly more difficult. But the real innovation is the cluster warhead. At approximately 7 kilometers altitude, the warhead opens. The missile doesn't hit the ground. It doesn't need to. At that altitude, it releases between 20 and 80 smaller submunitions that scatter over a wide area. One missile can affect a zone up to 27 kilometers wide. Here's what that means for air defense. A single ballistic missile appears on radar as one target. The defender has seconds to decide, intercept or not. But before any interceptor can reach it, that one target transforms into dozens of smaller targets. Each submunition is small. Each is moving at extremely high speed. Each is falling toward a different location. The terminal phase systems like Patriot can't engage effectively because the targets are too small and too numerous. David's Sling has a maximum interception ceiling of approximately 15 kilometers, but by the time the warhead opens at 7 kilometers, it's already inside that envelope. Even Arrow and David's Sling are intended for point defense, not for defeating dozens of submunitions scattered across an entire city. This is not a failure of Israeli technology. This is a failure of the entire concept of terminal phase missile defense against cluster munitions. The problem is physics, not engineering. Let me give you the numbers that should terrify every defense planner in the West. According to Hebrew press reports citing leaked security data, Iran launched nearly 650 missiles over 40 days of confrontation. Of those, 77 successfully penetrated Israeli airspace and reached their designated targets. 16 of those were identified as carrying heavy warheads weighing between 100 and 500 kilograms of explosives. But the cluster missiles were the real problem. 61 cluster missiles reached their targets without interception. Each cluster missile contains between 20 and 80 submunitions. Even at the low end, that's over 1 to 200 submunitions that Israeli air defense systems could not stop. The damage from these strikes has been catastrophic. According to the Jerusalem Post, 9,115 damage cases have been registered from missile strikes, including 4,609 in Tel Aviv alone. The breakdown: 6,586 buildings, 1,485 vehicles, and 1,044 pieces of various equipment destroyed or damaged. The human cost is mounting. Israel's health ministry reported 2,175 injuries since the war began on February 28th, with 85 still hospitalized. 205 people were hospitalized in just 24 hours at the peak of the strikes. Social life in Tel Aviv has ground to a halt. Shops are shuttered. Residents complain their country has become a missile testing ground. At Ben Gurion Airport, desperate Israelis seeking to flee have created chaos, with flights limited to 100 passengers. Here's the number that matters. The weight of a single submunition is only 2 to 3 kilograms. Yet these small munitions, traveling at hypersonic speeds, can penetrate the roofs of fortified bunkers and completely dislodge vehicles from their positions. One submunition was recorded penetrating the roof of a hardened military bunker. Iran is spending relatively little to manufacture these cluster warheads. Israel is spending millions per interception attempt, and failing most of the time. The cost-exchange ratio is devastating. There's a cascade happening here that explains why no one stopped the Khorramshahr-4. Let me walk you through it. First, detection is nearly impossible. The flight time from Iran to Israel is measured in minutes. By the time radar operators identify the launch, the missile is already approaching Israeli airspace. The destruction of early warning radars has reportedly further reduced warning times. Second, discrimination is extremely difficult. Defenders have only 1 to 2 minutes to determine what type of warhead is inbound before it separates. Differentiating a cluster warhead from a conventional warhead before the point of separation is nearly impossible with current technology. Third, the engagement window is impossibly short. Once the warhead opens at 7 kilometers altitude, interceptors have seconds to respond. But the submunitions are too small, too fast, and too numerous for terminal phase systems to engage effectively. Fourth, economic constraints compound the problem. Each Arrow 3 interceptor costs between $2 million and $4 million. Each SM-3 interceptor costs even more. The Khorramshahr-4 cluster missile costs a fraction of that. Even if Israel could intercept every submunition, which it cannot, the cost would be unsustainable. This is the cascade that broke Israel's air defense network. Not a single point of failure. A cascade of failures across detection, discrimination, engagement, and economics. And the Khorramshahr-4 was designed to exploit every single one. Here's what the mainstream coverage is missing. The question isn't how many missiles got through. The question is what Iran proved about the execution gap. For decades, Western military planners have operated on an assumption. The assumption was that cluster munitions on ballistic missiles were theoretically possible, but operationally impractical. The technical challenges were too great. The accuracy would be insufficient. The submunitions would be too unreliable. Iran just closed that execution gap. The Khorramshahr-4 cluster warhead works. It opens at the correct altitude, it disperses submunitions over a wide area, the submunitions detonate reliably, and they cause catastrophic damage to buildings, vehicles, and infrastructure. One cluster missile was observed hitting 5 different locations simultaneously in the Ramat Gan area, with submunitions creating deep holes in courtyards and courtyards. Another submunition completely dislodged a vehicle from its position and threw it a long distance. This is not experimental technology. This is operational, combat-proven, mass-produced weaponry that Iran has demonstrated it can deploy at scale. Hezbollah is watching. The Houthis are watching. Every non-state actor with Iranian backing is learning the same lesson. Cluster ballistic missiles defeat Western air defense, and they are affordable. The execution gap is closed. And every defense planner in the world is now recalculating the vulnerability of their own airspace. Most people watching coverage of this war are watching the military scoreboard, missiles intercepted, percentage rates, military targets hit or missed. But there's another scoreboard. It's updated in defense ministries in Tel Aviv, Washington, and London. It doesn't use the word interception rate. It uses words like vulnerability window and cost exchange ratio and asymmetric saturation. On that scoreboard, something fundamental just shifted. The Khorramshahr-4 strike didn't just damage 50 sites in Tel Aviv. It demonstrated that Israel's multi-layered air defense network, Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow, has a vulnerability that cannot be fixed with more interceptors or better radars. The vulnerability is cluster warheads, and the only way to defeat them is to intercept the missile before the warhead separates, at altitudes above 7 kilometers. That requires early detection, rapid response, and enough interceptors to engage multiple missiles simultaneously. Israel does not currently have that capability at scale, and building it would take years and cost tens of billions of dollars. The trap is that every week the war continues makes it harder for Israel to claim air superiority and harder for Israeli civilians to return to normal life. The shops in Tel Aviv remain shuttered, the residents remain terrified. The exodus from Ben Gurion Airport continues. Iran didn't need to destroy Tel Aviv. They needed to make Tel Aviv unlivable. And the Khorramshahr-4 cluster missile is doing exactly that. Here's what makes this harder to talk about than it should be. Israel cannot publicly acknowledge the full failure of its air defense network, because admitting that cluster missiles are penetrating at scale would trigger exactly the kind of panic that is already visible at Ben Gurion Airport. So the official statements emphasize interception rates and military targets, not because the people saying them believe the numbers, but because the alternative, telling 9 million Israelis that their air defense network has a vulnerability that cannot be fixed, creates a psychological crisis that has no clean resolution. The silence is not a cover-up. The silence is a choice between bad options. And Israel chose the one that buys time. The Khorramshahr-4 cluster missile strike on April 3, 2026, will be studied in military academies for decades, not because of the damage, because of what it proved. It proved that ballistic missile defense, as currently conceived, cannot stop cluster warheads. It proved that saturation attacks work. It proved that asymmetric warfare, expensive interceptors versus cheap submunitions, is economically unsustainable for the defender. Iran just demonstrated all of this in a single strike. The question is not whether other adversaries will copy this tactic. The question is how soon. Here's my question for you in the comments. Should Israel invest tens of billions of dollars in developing a system to intercept cluster warheads before separation, or should they accept that their cities are vulnerable and focus on civil defense instead? I read every comment. The best ones I'll address in a follow-up. All sources are linked in the description. CGTN, Military Watch Magazine, Al-Quds, and Yeni Shafak confirm the strike details, casualty figures, and technical specifications. If you made it this far, you understand that the next war won't be won by the side with the best defenses. It will be won by the side with the weapons that make those defenses irrelevant. This is war conflict. I'll see you in the next one.